Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at another adaptation of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This one is from 1973. It was a made-for-television adaptation, and if you can believe it, it's one of, maybe in fact I would be daring to say, the darkest version of Dorian Gray ever put to film. This one stars Shane Briant as the titular Dorian Gray, and Nigel Davenport as Lord Henry Wotton. And okay, so here's what you gotta understand about this version, is that it's a 1970s TV movie, and it looks like a 1970s TV movie. Where the television series that we looked at before, that was only an hour-long adaptation, it looked and felt like a movie. This feels like a 1970s teledrama. In fact, it kind of looks and feels a lot like Dark Shadows, if you're familiar with Dark Shadows. We actually talked about it before, that Jonathan Frid was in the last adaptation we talked about, just briefly, and then it turns out this version was actually produced by the producers of Dark Shadows, and if you listen closely, and you're a big fan of Dark Shadows as I am, you will notice that a lot of the music is lifted directly from that show and just plugged into this film. I mentioned before that there are some productions of Dorian Gray that completely remove the art imitating life and life imitating art theme from their adaptations, and this is one of those versions. Sybil Vane is just a waitress. She is not a actress, she's just a waitress. There's also a bloody hilarious scene. I mean, the timing, the acting, the direction, everything about this scene is off. Just watch it. I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, it's just one of my favorite things ever put on television. This version, it has a kind of a dreary quality to it. And I like the dreary quality to it, but that being said, it makes it a version that I don't go back to often, particularly just because there's times when it almost makes me feel physically ill to watch it. Not because there's anything, not because of any of the themes. The themes are all things I'm used to seeing in other movies. It's specifically because of the way it looks. And all of the actors are cast, they all have an uncanny quality about them that it's sort of like The Shining, and the way Dorian acts is kind of weird. I really like Shane Bryant's performance of Dorian Gray. I think he's the only one who acts soft-spoken, has a high-pitched voice. He speaks in a flamboyant, again, sort of, don't take, you know what I mean, how I mean this, so don't take it wrong. He speaks in a sort of a stereotypically gay fashion. His voice is, again, a little higher pitched. He sounds and looks more like Dorian from the book. I know some of you would say Shane Bryant wasn't attractive enough to play Dorian Gray. I disagree. I think he's a very attractive man. But he himself said he actually didn't think he was that attractive, but he knew that he was a charismatic actor, and that's probably why he got cast in the role. And you know what? Maybe he's on to something there. Maybe that's why he got cast. But to me, I think Shane Bryant's an attractive guy. It's just his acting, the way he behaves. There's something kind of uncanny about his facial expressions. In Nigel Davenport, I've always thought this about Nigel Davenport. Everything I've ever seen the man in, he just looks uncanny. I think it's because he has a lazy eye. And whenever he is shown in close-up looking at other actors, his eye lines don't match exactly right. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had somebody talk to you, but they're not looking at you. They're looking like right past you at your ear or something, and their eyes just look kind of dead. My friend John does that to me all the time. It is a weird, it's a weird feeling, and that's kind of what I get from him. Some of the people in the comments section, you can watch this movie, it's free on YouTube, just like the last version we watched. Some people commented that, you know what, it just changed too much. I disagree. I love the changes. I think this feels like an adaptation where they change things to make it feel more like a movie. Some people were commenting on my Christmas Carol videos and being like, this version changed too much. Okay, listen, there's like 100 versions of the Christmas Carol, okay? And there's like 25 or 50 versions of Dorian Gray. If it was the same story every time, what's the point of making a new version? There's no point. You know, you're just basically doing what plays do. You're putting on the same story with different actors and the same sets, and it just gets tiring. This one changed things. Again, Basil he's not Dorian's lover anymore, but he's killed much earlier on in the story. He's actually killed after Dorian has only had the painting for 3 years as opposed to 19. Sybil's death, I think quite interesting change, where Dorian ghosts her for a long time, and then when he pretends to come back home, she catches him having just finished having an affair, and he's still putting his shirt on, and she runs out and kills herself in a fit of passion. James Vane doesn't just want to kill Dorian, he wants to keep him alive and blackmail him. But Dorian's gambling debts, because, as he says, to live as extravagantly as he's lived for 20 years, it costs a lot of money, and he's actually blown through his whole fortune. All he has is the value of his family's name. One of the changes is a direct ripoff of the 1945 version. It's probably my least favorite part of the film. It's a character called Beatrice, who is Basil Hallward's niece. She's just Gladys from the 45 film, right down to the fact that everybody tries to warn her that Dorian is a terrible human, and she doesn't believe it. Or she's like, well, you know what, yeah, maybe you're a terrible person, but I believe there's good in you, whatever. That's where there's one thing they do with it at the very end, and that's the one reason I say I don't mind that change, because Beatrice adds one key thing to the story that Gladys did not in the original, and it's actually polar opposite to what Gladys did for the ending of the 45 film. Beatrice does the exact opposite for this version in 1973. I find it very entertaining. I find it very dark. And that's where we need to get into the uncomfortable stuff. Dorian Gray, and this is one of the things I like about it, he's sort of an everyday guy, in a way, if you interpret this merely as a morality story, is that anybody, given the opportunity to do everything he's ever wanted, to indulge every single whim he ever had with no self-control, and never pay the consequences of it, anybody would be corrupted by that power. Anybody would become so easily influenced because there's no guiding principle. There's no conscience. The Dorian in this, I like it. I like it in one sense. When you're given the opportunity to indulge everything you've ever wanted to do, then eventually all of the most extreme things that we everyday people want will become boring to you. And it's sort of like, if you've ever read about addictions of any kind, but particularly porn addictions, people tend to start off with very vanilla stuff, and they end up working their way up to extremely violent pornography if they become addicted, because they're no longer getting off. I hate to use that term; it's a very crass term, but that's the most blunt way of putting it. They're no longer satisfied. They have Dorian do some reprehensible stuff that no human being would ever try to rationalize. And I'm not going to get into it. It involves sexual assault. And some of it involves minors. So, now, it does not show anything. It's a 1970s TV movie. Of course it doesn't show anything. But I'm giving you fair warning. If you watch this version and you pay attention to the things that are implied, and when I say implied, I mean they all but show you, it will disturb you. Again, I see that as a good and a bad thing in the context of fiction. I'm obviously talking about the film. Within the context of this film, having him do that, it shows how corruption begets corruption, and he gets worse over time, and he becomes increasingly dissatisfied, to the point where by the time he's bored with all humanity and with all the vices of the world, you kind of understand it, because you actually know for a fact he has done everything in this version. You don't want Dorian to be redeemed, and I feel like a big part of this story, whether or not it ends with him being redeemed, a big part of it should be that you want him to be redeemed. So that when he's not redeemed, it's a tragedy. And when he is redeemed, like in the 1945 film, it's like the last second of his life grasping to salvation. Again, there's great things in it. Like at the end when he realizes, and this is what I was talking about, he realizes that he only married Beatrice to escape the painting, and that his love for her was actually an act of pride. And there's a chilling moment where he whips off the canvas, the curtain covering the canvas, and his face is shocked, and we get a crash zoom in on this painting, and it's the last time we see the painting, it's worse than it is throughout the rest of the movie. They don't just say it. It is physically, like, looking at it, it is 1,000,000 times worse than it was before. And he goes, it was worse. You know, I realized in that moment, I didn't love Beatrice. I had done all this to escape. I didn't love her. I didn't love anyone. And it's chilling, because this is happening as he is ready to stab the painting and destroy it forever. And it really is, I mean, it's a chilling ending. It really is. It left me, actually, I'd seen it before, but coming back and watching it the last time, having had put about a year's distance between me and it, I found that when I was done watching it, it actually deeply disturbed me. More so than I remember it doing, and maybe that's just because I've aged into it, and now I don't know, maybe I caught more of it than I did before, but it is a disturbing story, and that it does get it across. There is another element that I'll give as kind of a little pro and con. I like that Dorian narrates this version himself, and when we get to the end, we find out that his narration is not like from heaven, he's written it in a diary. So, yeah, in that sense, I liked it, but it also is bookended with this really terribly dumb line, where he's like, everything a man will ever do is written in the stars, but who does the writing? If I knew that, if I could be sure, then I would know whether to praise the devil or curse God for what my life has been. And that's like the sort of thing like an edgy teen would post on Reddit. It's not a particularly good line. I get what they were trying to do with it, but it's very confused. It doesn't make any sense, even within the context of the story. So this version is definitely a mixed bag, but it's sort of a mixed bag in the same way as the Guy Pearce Christmas Carol was. If you want something that goes to those dark places, this gives that to you, but it's at the cost of sacrificing some elements of the story, which would have been nice if we could have retained. I hate Dorian in this version. I kind of like hating him, but I'm not really sure that's who Dorian Gray was meant to be. And so this version is one of those things that I'll throw out as a, if you are looking for something very, very different, then this is definitely up your alley. And I would give it I'd at least give it one watch just to see what you think of it. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, but the next time we'll be looking at something a little closer to the book. In fact, it might be the most faithful version ever made.